Ladies and gentlemen, a special thank you to the young Marines for providing our color guard today. They always handle the Sunday chores, and they do it most admirably. With dignity and class. Thank you very much. On behalf of the Fort Henry Group, I'd like to welcome you to, I believe it's the 14th annual Fort Henry Days. And every year, you have to ask yourself one question. Are you ready for some history? Come on, light it up. Let these reenactors know you're out there. They want to give you a spirited performance. Fire up. We come here today to talk about, or to I should say demonstrate and show you what is probably the Wheeling's most readily identifiable historical event, Betty Zane's famous gunpowder run. For years and years, people have tended to forget about it. What people tend to not to remember, I should say, later. Betty Zane was actually a legend in her own lifetime. She was extremely popular. In fact, by the 1930s, she probably, in the pantheon of American myths, she probably stood just under Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone. Since then, her legend has ebbed a little bit. On the other hand, it's people like you that helped keep it alive. It was, and again, a dandy tale to tell. A 16-year-old girl steps up and does a brave act that perhaps many a brave man would fail to take up the challenge on. And we're now here to bring you that story. Harold, do we see anything going on out in the field here?
Oh, this is particularly at the moment. I wanted to set the stage a little bit historically for what the importance of what happened here in your town of Wheeling.
Yeah, I'm ready.
It has been said that Wheeling saved America. The battle that was fought here saved America. Sounds like a large order. Sounds like hyperbole, exaggeration. But here's the factual basis for that statement. The British, if they had taken Wheeling, if those 100-some-odd people, men, women, and children, had not stood, next would have been Pittsburgh, and then eastward, and they would have crushed the American forces between them.
The Battle of Fort Henry actually started when John Lind came to the river to announce the presence of the Indian forces. John Lind, are you anywhere out there? September 11, 1782, John Lind had been out probably 20, 30 miles deep into Ohio scouting for Indians. What he saw made his blood run cold. He saw a huge group of Indians and British Rangers.
There you go.
260 Indians and a group of 40 to 60 British Rangers accompanied them, headed toward Fort Henry. He mounted his horse, ran toward the river, and as soon as he got there, he fired a rifle to let them know that the Indians were coming. The Fort in turn fired a swivel gun. When he got across the river, what he had to tell them was even more. He told them what he saw was chilling enough. And after that, the word spread. Of course, these people only had about 2 hours to get inside the fort. Again, that's what they could grab, notify people. It was a small group that made it inside the fort.
Once inside the fort, whatever they brought with them was all they had. To set the stage a little further, this small settlement, which was basically between 10th and about 14th Street, from the river, maybe not quite as far as Chaplin, more like what we would call Main Street today, that was Wheeling. And in those days and times, people were very, very, to necessity, self-sufficient. So what you had in your house, what you had in your fields, was what you depended on to carry you through the winter. Remember, this was 9/11 of 1782, and if you lost it, there was no time to replant, there was no town across the river you could go to, so if you lost your livestock, you may very well be facing starvation. And nonetheless, they fought it up, which was the expression, taking what they could with them.
Starvation was an ancient weapon of warfare. The Indians understood that very clearly by hitting them in September.
I'm sorry, Joe, there's something going on in the field.
When the Indians realized they had been discovered, when they found out they were discovered, they didn't make any pains to cover their tracks. They very leisurely surrounded the fort, let them know they were there. They had a fire going. they ran around and began killing livestock, burning a few cabins, just to let the defenders of the fort get away.
This seems like a small party, doesn't it?
Looks can be deceiving. The Indians were the masters of the retreat, the ambush.
There's an individual out there who's obviously not an Indian.
Most likely British Rangers. Again, that's what put a little different twist on this battle. Typically, when the Indians, if the frontiersmen could hold them off for a day, these raids very seldom lasted longer than that. But the problem is with British Rangers with them, the Indians would stay longer because the British Rangers were very definitely a dogged enemy. And by the way, they weren't really British. What they were American loyalists.
Good moving that wagon. Hey, that doesn't look like that.
All that obviously bodes ill for the defenders of the fort. Again, at this time, Fort Henry is 8 years old. It's made of extremely dry logs. It was probably only by sheer luck that they didn't burn it down themselves, which happened in other frontier forts. The Indian have no cannon to lay siege to that fort. All they have to do is get flames to that fort, and it will burn.
So little or no contact with the flame would be enough.
That would definitely be enough. Those logs are very dry. If they get on it, they'll burn. By the way, we were blessed today with the presence of the Wheeling Fire Department. Several years ago, the reenactor Indians that succeeded with their real-life counterparts did not and started a fire. Unfortunately, we were saved by the Wheeling Fire Department. However, in 1782, that did not exist. It wasn't too long after the Indians laid their siege lines around the fort that a demand for surrender was made. And here there was a chance to talk about some secondary heroes at Fort Henry. Part of the problem with Betty Zane, her deed was so brave that it overshadowed several other ones, but we'll get a chance today to talk about some of those other folks.
I just want to point out that the representation of the fort on your left and this small circle on the right, that's in the event that was 60 yards apart, which would be 60% of the football field. Quite a distance when you consider shooting at you.
One of the things that was a very unpleasant discovery.
They actually got to the wall.
That hay was right against those walls.
If they get that against the logs, it's bad for the jeopardy.
Start losing hay.
They're using the hay wagon now as cover.
I would say in the parlance of the time, they're taking hot fire from the fort.
Okay. And most of these frontiersmen were pretty good.
These were people that hunted for a living. It sounds like there's
screaming going on in that building.
Are there possibly hostages in there?
I don't know.
I was screaming. It's not fair.
Well, we pondered the fate of the hostages here to see what happens to them. One of the unpleasant realities to the Indians is the fact that they had a small artillery piece inside the fort that helped keep them at bay.
And there's children hostage. Wasn't let off into captivity, am I correct?
Yes, they are, and captivity was a very uncertain thing. Typically, you wouldn't be the first.
He was beating her with that war club.
I was merely chastising her to come along. I think what they mean to do is to bait the defenders inside the fort so they can lure them out.
Which is not a good tactic for the force.
Absolutely not. Those defenders stay buttoned up in the fort.
There's a ball over there.
Here's some over on the left being led away. An equally uncertain outcome when going to captivity.
Typically, any captive they were going to keep would be forced to run the gauntlet. After that, they survive. They may or may not keep them. You didn't want to be the first guy caught. You didn't want to be the first prisoner taken at the beginning of the year. Typically, they were burned. I see this little negotiations go on here. One of the secondary heroes of this battle was Jonathan Zane, Betty Zane's brother. When the Rangers and the Indians stepped up to the fort to demand their surrender, he turned around and delivered them a fiery speech. He said something to the effect of, "We couple King George's name with blackest infamy." He went on to say, "Is this the actions of a great and Christian sovereign who makes war on helpless women and children?
trouble in this fort, they're all out here in front.
Obviously, you can see which side we're on. They stand poised for the attack by Amos. I'm surprised that they don't try to rush the fort. That swivel gun must have
I think
given them a little bad medicine there.
to think about
What you're seeing here is a little taste of psychological warfare. It's like the British reply basically was that they had 1,000 men in a cannon coming the next day, and if they didn't surrender, they would take the fort by storm, and no quarter would be granted.
But there were other historical incidents at the same time where forts surrendered, and as they came out, every individual man, woman, and child were massacred. That happened down in what we now call Kentucky.
And again, to put this in perspective, when the people went inside the fort, there were roughly 100 men, women, and children who were defenders of the fort. The people that were facing them were roughly 100 Indians and British Rangers. To put this in perspective, the Indians in particular, they called them light infantry of the day, and they were without a doubt some of the finest in the world at their time. Today, we would consider them something more along the line of recon Marines. They were absolutely fantastic fighting men. The people inside the fort were anything but that. They were tradesmen of any of 100 trades the frontier had at the time. They were militia at best, part-time soldiers. So it's what you see here is a very unequal contest.
Seems to be a pullback on the part of the Indians.
Oh, there's an escape. Escape.
They're going for the fort.
Oh, they still have one fort. Oh, no, wait, she's broken away.
No, they said Rachichi. They said
Past
Rachichi.
that last guy, she's good. She made it. Oh, they've got another one. Where did they get all these captives from?
She broke away.
All right, let's hear it for the last captive.
Again, TT.
Well, it appears there'll be no negotiated surrender. They're going to have to take the fort by main force.
I wouldn't expect the caliber of the people in that fort, but they would.
Oh, absolutely. And the end of Jonathan James' speech basically said, we fight to the last bullet, to the last man.
Remember, the Zanes and the McCullochs were in that fort, and they didn't run.
Come on, bro.
Interestingly
Those
enough,
gun again.
Family that,
There he goes.
Caldwells.
There we go.
Caldwells are actually Caldwells on both sides of the fort. Some of their cousins were.
He's gonna play back now.
Other Caldwells were here with the British. Oh, it sounded like we heard the cannon go.
Yeah, I do believe that occurred. But back with that hay wagon.
Well, again, flames are an ancient weapon of warfare, and I'm sure the Indian and the Crown soldiers are very effective at employing them.
Draw fire close enough to take care of those people bringing the hay wagon in.
They'll deliver them. I think they'll deliver them a hard volley real fast. Sounds like someone has some bad powder there.
That was the frequent problem, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. The problem was the powder got damp. Like today, back in those days, it may have not burned completely, or perhaps even worse, it wouldn't fire at all. And again, powder is one of the, now that we bring up the topic, powder gets a crucial thing here. There was only enough powder kept in the fort for about a one-day standoff. The problem was the Indians busted so fast there was no time to bring them more. And the swivel gun that they had was a small artillery piece. but it had a rather lusty appetite for powder. It kept the enemy at bay, but when they fired it roughly 17 times to keep the Indians off the walls.
I don't want to go to my house.
I'll stand behind that hayway. I can't tell what they have in mind.
Seems like they're all having problems with their guns.
They're still trying to move a little closer. But again, the real crisis, the high point of the battle comes right now. The fort is out of gunpowder. Betty Zane is making her run to the blockhouse to get more. And again, this is one of those truly heroic things. When they said we're out of powder and they asked for someone to step forward, she stepped up and said, simply, if I fall, I'll be less than a man. Less than a man, and she went.
60% of a football field. That was no small accomplishment to get across that area. But going, nobody bothered her. They just thought it was humorous or strange.
In the second siege, but they supposedly no shots were fired at her. She came across the first time. They just rather derisively yelled, "Squaw, squaw," and they let her pass.
Now she's going to come back with either an apron or a tablecloth filled with powder, which is the life and death difference for the people in the fort.
That gunpowder enables them to keep their professional enemies at bay because they're ported up behind.
Well, she better, because they're going to catch her like crazy.
Here she goes. She goes.
Go, 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 go.
There they go. They caught her already.
For her life.
God.
Oh, what's sharpshooting? Oh, no. She's down. Will she make it?
She's in.
Let's hear it for Betty Zane.
Oh my God.
No, it wasn't supposed to happen.
You know, the theatrical part of it is very nice, but again, when you ponder this in real life, that was truly a heroic deed. Running across the place, perhaps a couple hundred rifles, people shooting at you like that, truly is the stuff that legends are made of.
She saved the fort and America.
An interesting thing about this, the battle like this on the frontier was an intensely personal thing in that
Go.
Flames.
They mean to try this again. Now they're fortified. There's plenty of gunpowder. I think you'll hear plenty of shooting to drive them off. There's no shortage of it now.
We're driving them back. You're right. Hot fire. I don't think they got it. There's a casualty on the Indians.
Interesting enough, at that battle, the casualties were all among the Indians and British Rangers. The only man that was wounded at Fort Henry was Ebenezer Zane's slave, Batty Sam. When Betty Zane made her gunpowder run, it was funny, when they shot at her, she said, in her own words, she said the bullets fell around her that they actually felt like nails. They were so thick. They actually cut her clothing, but again, miraculously, she made it back safe.
If you're familiar with Will, she ran from where Horns was located to about halfway to the Capitol Theater on the other side of the street. The Indians would have been stationed around where 10th and Main is, in the general area, maybe up as far, but not quite as far as Kaufman's building.
Well, here we see them begin to burn the
It's light and it's just being stubborn.
frontiersmen.
Now the fingers are coming out. This may not be good.
A very dangerous thing to do, Earl. As long as they're buttoned up behind those walls, they are quite able to defend themselves. On the other hand, when they get out in the field, the Indians are still very much the master of run and gun warfare. Again, these frontiersmen better be careful not to be flanked. I see some of them out there checking that cornfield. That's a very dangerous spot.
Beyond that cornfield,
The further these frontiersmen get from the walls of the fort, the greater danger they're in.
when you hear these volleys almost continuously, you should bear in mind that each one of those rifles only had one shot, and it took
I got a casualty.
minutes for a good marksman to reload it.
Of Of course, now we begin to see a little bit. The Indians have the same problem that the frontiersmen had. That basically, they only have the powder that they can carry, which was what was in their horn. They can't shoot indiscriminately, indefinitely, unless they run out of ammunition. They well might be getting close to it.
Everybody's gun's been active.
And then you see the side, as you sit here and watch this battle, they're probably burned as much gunpowder here as they did at the real siege. There's a lot of shooting going on here, folks.
A lot of these guns are going off right.
I we begin to see some casualties on both sides. Apparently the threat of reinforcements is a hollow threat. Oh, that big ranger went down. Ah, and one of the Gerties went down. George, I believe. Oh, we see a little hand-to-hand combat here. Ah, they begin. Oh, we have one man. Oh, wow.
I know it is.
It wouldn't surprise me at all to see if we see some scalps in here. Ah, the Indians begin to carry away their wounded. Well, perhaps they're not as unarmed as we thought. No, this doesn't look like a faint retreat. They look like they're leaving the field. Okay. The real life story of it, during the early morning hours of the third day of the siege, the Indians had divined that they needed to take the blockhouse in order to take the fort. They sent an Indian with a firebrand up to toss it into the cabin to burn it. And they were met by Daddy Sam, Ebenezer Zane's slave. Sam stood up with his musket, shot the Indian. Now it's pitch black out there, and of course you have a huge puff of smoke from the black powder rifle. The Indian disappeared in the night, but what they did know that from his scream that Sam had driven him off, and more importantly, the firebrand that he had was on the outside of the cabin, the inside. That shot alerted the fort, which of course helped divert the further attack that they had planned. And what you have now by morning, the third day, the Indians are dispirited. They begin to be driven off. They begin to leave in ones and twos and small groups.
One you'll see, Joe, looks like they have driven Indians from the field as it looks right at the moment. I don't know if that's the end of the story or not.
I believe it is. I believe they've successfully defended it.
Crying victory.
They're crying victory. Defenders of Fort Henry, come to the center of the field.
Defenders of Fort Henry.
Defenders inside the fort.
Defenders of Fort Henry,
Step out, take a bow to from your admiring public.
Please come out.
By the way, a special thanks to the reenactors today. We had several of them pulled out. Basically, we had a rather soggy evening last night. Weapons got wet, powder got wet, things like that. But the folks who stayed, I think, provided you a most excellent show.
Woo!
Gentlemen, come to the forward. Valiant lady defenders of Fort Henry, come up and step up and take a bow. Betty Zane, come to the fore.
Betty Zane.
I don't know.
One more time, let's hear it for the valiant defenders of Fort Henry who carried the field this day. Huzzah! 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 And by the way, a special thanks to Betty Zane, step out here.
Betty Zane, front and center. Take a bow.
She have won Lock and Santa this year as our Betty Zane, valiant defender of Fort Henry, the heroine of the day. Now let's hear it for everyone's hit of the party, the Indians. The Indians!
To all of you, whether on the field or in the audience, thank you for coming and keeping history alive.
We give you the reenactors of Fort Henry one more time for this valiant band who've braved hell and high.
Huzzah! Huzzah! Huzzah!
And that wraps Fort Henry Day 2012.